Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast. Your JD Edwards and database security system is wide open. My name is Amanda Greiner, Marketing Coordinator with GSI, and I'm very pleased to welcome our main presenter, Bill Rem, our ATS database lead here at GSI. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance to review our safe harbor statement. And now for a quick overview of today's meeting, which will last about 60 minutes. First, I will take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items, as well as provide a brief company overview. Then I will turn it over to Bill to get into our main presentation, which will last about 40 minutes. Next, we will take a minute to go over upcoming educational events, and then we'll wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the questions panel at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window located on the right side of your screen. Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input your questions. And now I would like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service JD Edwards consulting organization. We're an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. We have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in the U.S. GSI specializes in project consulting, managed services, and cloud and hosting services, with all of our services backed with a 100% guarantee. GSI also provides a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other enterprise applications. In addition, we are a product development company that has many popular products, including Genius, which is our advanced monitoring and performance analytics solution for JD Edwards or any business critical system on any platform. Genesis is our load and stress testing application for system design, validation, or expansion for JD Edwards or any web-based critical system. G Shield is our comprehensive security solution for all JD Edwards, including password reset and two-factor authentication. Rapid Reconciler, which allows you to effectively manage your inventory, in-transit, and R&V reconciliation processes for any version of E1 or World. And Rapid Approval is a Salesforce AppExchange solution that streamlines the approval request process. And now I'd like to turn things over to Bill for our main presentation.
All right, I'm going to change the presenter to me and show my monitor. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. I hope everybody likes my professional headshot there. Had that taken by the finest photographer within 5 feet of me. This is Bill Rem, live from Austin, Texas. And welcome everybody who's on the call, on the webcast. I see there's some familiar names out there and some new people. I look forward to telling you all about my current hot button topic, which is security. Now, before we get started, I just want to make sure to set some expectations. First of all, JD Edwards is not as secure as you think, and it's not the software's fault. One thing I want to make sure that I tell you up front is that I'm not going to teach you how to set up security in this webcast. I'm going to show you a lot of cool stuff about it. I'm going to show you some of the things that you probably haven't thought about at all, and I'm going to then show you some of the ways that you could look into changing that. Now, I'm the database team manager. Obviously, I'm the expert on the database side, although I was a CNC since 1998. I do know a lot about that as well. We do have a security team. It's headed up by Brian Connor. He's very good at this, and he manages all of our security audits and things like that. So if you're looking for security work related to JD Edwards specifically, Brian Connor will be able to help you out with that, and I would do all of the database related stuff. So let's get started. First of all, in JD Edwards and on the database, nothing is set up out of the box. You have to actually intentionally configure the application and the database to have any kind of security. Now, I know that the passwords are encrypted, and there are some things that are kind of built in, but really you're handed a keys to a system that with the doors, you don't have to install the locks yourself. You may have a key to it, but it's not very secure. So you're going to have to configure things not just on the CNC side inside the tool, but also inside the application. There's and then the technical part and the CNC, the database as well. Those are shipped without any kind of security set up. And then you have to worry about your file system too. So a lot of areas in a JD Edwards setup, and some of you are probably thinking, yeah, I know all that. Okay, great. So let's talk about some specific things. And we'll start out with JD Edwards. And my current, the one obviously I'm focused on is database. I'm going to save that for last, and we'll get to that towards the end. So let's talk about what kind of stuff in JD Edwards do we have related to security, and are you thinking about that right now? Now, one thing that is new with 9.2 is the concept of site keys, and that means that each site, each installation of JD Edwards has its own secure site key that's related only to that company. Now, that is not something you're going to find in the previous versions, but this is something new that it encrypts. It's unique to each customer. It encrypts. It's a stronger method of password encryption for 9.2. And that is required for Enterprise One, the sign-on security. So if you're not aware of that, you probably need to look that up. I also in my presentation, I want to let you know that I have links and notes to all of this stuff that I'm talking about, and I do believe we provide the presentation after the webcast. So don't worry about taking too many notes. I've got it all in here already written down. Also in 9.2 or 9.1.3 actually, your passwords inside JD Edwards are encrypted. Now, if you're on a release prior to 9.1.3, Tools 9.1.3, then your passwords are not encrypted. They're going to be plain text inside the database. So you need to make sure that if you are on that version, you need to go ahead and start thinking about a tools release upgrade. 9.1.3 is not supported anymore. If you're running 9.1.3, you're probably on a older version of your database and of Windows. So it's important, check your tools release, make sure you're on a newer release, at least 9.1.3. Really, you need to be on 9.1.5 or later, because 9.1.5 is where you can start using Oracle 12c as a database and SQL Server 2014. And Windows, you can get into the later Windows versions. So 9.1.3, if you're on that, you're probably far behind on a lot of stuff. And there's other security as well, which I'm not going to discuss here, but it's Windows and patches and whatnot. If you're running an unsupported version of Windows or SQL 2008 or Oracle 11.204, you may not have the latest patches. If you have 11.203 or something earlier than that, you're not being patched at all. So that's one thing about security. Patching is a whole different webcast that I'm going to be doing. We'll just talk specifically about security, even though they're related. So inside JD Edwards, a lot of you probably know this, but when someone signs into JDE, the application itself plugs that user into what's called a JDE system user. Now, this system user is basically the liaison between JD Edwards and the database. You can set up more than one system user, but as you can see on this screen, there is one, the default system user is JDE, and it's shipped with the standard password of JDE. I hope I didn't give away a big secret there, but that is true. The standard password is JDE. That user has to correspond with a user on the database with the same name and the same password, and all database activity funnels through this one user. Now, you can create multiple system users for different departments, different data sources, whatever you want. And if you need to think about doing something like that, definitely get in touch with Brian Connor here at GSI. He can give you details on how to get that done. But if you're looking for more granular control from the application side and even from the database side, multiple system users are free, and they break up your security into easily manageable chunks that are easy to troubleshoot in case you have anything to go wrong. If you don't if you just keep using the same system user, then if you have issues created by the JD Edwards application, then it's exceedingly difficult to track a problem to a specific user or a department. You can try to use the tools in the server manager as much as possible, but chances are you're only going to be able to narrow it down to a handful of people. So I highly recommend using multiple system users, if only just to separate out your administrators from your users, and maybe have a separate role for troubleshooting, because a lot of problems that are caused in JD Edwards can be traced back to security problems, people having too much authority on a table or something like that. Now, prior to 9.2, and I'm going to talk specifically about this in a later slide, there is a different method of security on the database between 9.2 and all prior roles, and that relates to all of the permissions being set to public. So I'm going to talk about that in the database section. The slide is going to look awfully similar when we get there. Let's move back into some more of the JD Edwards security. All right, so we talked about the system user. There's also file system security. Now with 9.2, they've added the option, and actually a little bit before that, they have allowed you to start moving your media objects to the database, and you can also move your print queue stuff to the database. I have a whole other webcast on moving things to the database. In fact, I'll be doing a presentation to Collaborate this year, specifically on moving media objects and print queues to the database and all the considerations there. But if you're not on 9.2, or if you've chosen not to move those items to the database, those are going to reside on a file system somewhere. And if that file system is open and people can access that internally or externally, they can grab copies of your reports with the financial information on it if it's on there. Your media objects are going to have proprietary information, perhaps. I was an IT director for an aircraft company that had JD Edwards, and every one of the engineering documents, we had to keep every version of every document, and those had to be encrypted on the hard drives, because we couldn't allow people to get our proprietary knowledge, of course, but if somebody could get to those files once they had been saved and archived, they could change them and alter what the plans look like for this airplane, and that would be really bad for us specifically. But if you have company secrets and other information that you don't want found, if you've got stuff on the file system, that's not something JD Edwards can control at all. That has to be done by your server team or your non-JDE security team. Then we get into when people sign in to JD Edwards, how do you secure them? Obviously, they have a password. JD Edwards does have sign-in security. As I mentioned before, it has a new site key, which encrypts things even better for 9.2. The password encryption started in 9.1.3, so now you don't have to worry about them being in the plain text in the database. And there are the other options of single sign-on and stuff like that I'm not going to cover in this webcast, but you can implement more complicated, longer passwords and other things like that. Just so you know, if you're just using the standard JDE with a 10-character password, you get a lot of limitations on how you can sign in and what you can do. So take a look at what tools are released you're on and how you're signing in, and find out if that's really the best way to do it. Now, once you get into JD Edwards, how do you secure things inside there? Well, I've seen there's two basic ways. One is not really security, and the other one is security. So let's look at the one that people think is, but actually isn't security. And that's what we call menu-based security. That's where you go into the menu design, and you see all those green checks on the screen there. That is these are the menus, and this is from a customer that I will not name. And each one of those green checks means that a user can access that menu. And so if some clients, it's not as common anymore, but some clients will go in and they'll just uncheck folders and objects that they wouldn't be able to see from the menu. And on the surface, that seems good. You open the menu and you don't see something in there you don't think to run it. But what they don't consider is the form exits and row exits for all of the different types of applications inside JD Edwards. If they haven't secured FastPath in JDE security, then they can move anywhere in the system. So the menu filtering, the menu-based security where you just remove things off the menu is not actually security. Your system in JD Edwards is still wide open, even if you have that. So menu-based security is good if it's in conjunction with regular role-based security, which I'll talk about in a second. Some companies are like, well, we don't have that much going on. We don't have that many users. It's too complex to set up security. Not a good idea to leave yourself wide open like this. Moving on with JDE security is also the role-based security, which is much better. There's two different ways to do security in general, not just in JD Edwards. One is to deny everything by default, and then grant back the stuff that people actually need. And the other way is to grant all of things to everybody, or just leave it wide open and deny only specific items. So when you're working on security, these security items are added to the roles themselves, and those roles are assigned to those people. Now, if you do security, which is the deny all and grant back, that's way better, because then if somebody needs something, they have to ask you for it. If you do the grant all and start denying people stuff, then are you going to be able to secure all the thousands of applications that a particular user can't access? Can you secure all of the form exits and all of the row exits inside there? It's better just to restrict it all, go through the headache of figuring out what needs to be granted back, and then you have a much more secure system. Now, one of the problems I see with some companies who start out with, say, menu-based security and then move on to role-based security, they always go with the grant all method, and then they deny other apps, which it's a step up, but it's not really that much better. And then one day they'll realize, oh, we should have done deny all and grant back. So they go in and deny everything, and now all of these people inside their company have been restricted from things that they've been able to do for a long time. So it's always better to do the deny all right away before you release it to users, because then if you do that after you've already kind of had a business going, then you have a whole lot more calls to the help desk asking why they can't access stuff, and then you have to call their manager. Are they supposed to have access to this? And then they raise a fit, and then sometimes you end up having to give it to them because of politics, and then your system is now not secure because somebody who doesn't need access to something now has access to it just because they yelled too loud. And it's actually a really good argument to have a specific security person or security team that controls the security, somebody who can't be shaken or misdirected by those kind of things that aren't related to the actual usefulness of the application. And if you're not sure where you are with the menu-based or role-based, or if you've denied everything correctly or granted things back wrong, our security team can definitely help you figure that out. Let's move on to another part of JD Edwards, which this is the part of JDE. This is the management console called Server Manager, and this is where you can control and add and delete all of the technical parts of JD Edwards, and there is security related to that too. Most companies will install this, and the default user is JD_admin, but they won't change anything, and they may not even realize that they can change it. But what I'm showing here on the screen is the Server Manager users screen where you can set this stuff up. You can set up your Server Manager to use your JDE security to control access to Server Manager. So I've blacked this out because this is a screenshot from a client. But you set up your security server in there, and then you have user groups, and this is the default, the two ones right there are the default user groups. But you can see down below console admin that there's another one called cache clear. So a lot of companies will give just the rights to clear the web caches to a specific group or specific user, so that they can allow them to sign in to Server Manager and do it themselves without bothering the administrative team. And then at the bottom right, this is the list of the console users. Each user has a certain set of user groups that they're assigned to. You see the cache clear one has the common role of console user. And if you can also give the people other rights to manage the alerts and the other parts of Server Manager, not just the cache clear. I highly recommend you go into your Server Manager, find out if you have that set up to use JD Edwards, because if you do, then you can have people just sign in with their JDE username, and they don't have to use the administrative user JDE admin. And as with everything else, I highly recommend you do not use the default password for JDE admin, which is, as you can guess, JDE admin. So, as you know, with any kind of system user, I say change that password to the most complex password you can possibly imagine and hide it somewhere that only the administrator can see it, and then create another system user, another administrative user that has the same rights, but it has a specific name, and that way you know who is logging in and doing what. This is the most common part of JD Edwards besides, okay, so first of all, it's the JDE. That's got to be the worst. People install their systems with the JDE system user and leave it with JDE. That's the number one thing I see. This next one is Server Manager, not changing the JDE admin password, and also not setting it up to allow JDE security to manage logins. And specific to users, there's something cool inside the newer releases of Server Manager, is it show you can look up specific user activity as well. So this provides a little bit of security in the sense of what are they doing, why are they doing it, and whatnot. But it's on the track side, you can see user activity, server activity, and table cache. But you can go in there, grab all of the information about what they've been doing, and if you have some kind of a security breach or a problem, this can help you get that information and even grab the logs that are related to what they're doing, that specific user. And moving back into more specific security related stuff, the security workbench, which is P00950. This is the main part where this is the user role security screen. Sorry, I got the wrong screenshot there, apologies. But the security workbench is where you are going to set up the things like your all of the specific securities for each one. So if you see on the right side there, the Task Explorer security, Action security, Application security. So this is for the sysadmin. When the object name says *all, that means for all objects, you can do all actions. Obviously, if you see here down here at the bottom, the R98405A, that is specifically called out and for a certain type of security. And you can put security on a lot of different things. Most companies are going to have their security set up in the security workbench. It's a lot better these days. I know back when, 10 or 12 years ago, companies did not set up their security very well. And nowadays we have a lot of help with that from people like Brian with GSI, and also with some third-party tools like, gosh, what's that great tool name? You all know what I'm talking about, but I don't apparently. So here's some of the things you can secure in the security workbench. And I know some of you know this, but a lot of people don't realize that you have the ability to secure all of these things, and you maybe didn't even know they weren't secured in the first place. So if you want to keep users from running an application, you use application security. Now, I've seen some companies where they've had application security wide open, and they used action security to specifically restrict what they could do inside of that application. So action security and application security go hand in hand. If you allow somebody to use an application, so let's say you've implemented deny all, grant back, and you give somebody application security that allow them to run an application. If you don't give them the action security to do something in there, then it doesn't matter. They still can't access anything. And on the flip side, if you have a grant all deny back, if you don't specifically deny somebody the access to an application, then they will figure out how to open it. I guarantee it, even if they can't see it on a menu. Other things are row security, which is, in the background, JD Edwards sends a SQL statement to the database for all of this stuff. And the row security just adds another where clause in there that basically says, select me records from here, select star from here, where not in, and it puts in these, excludes maybe ranges of business unit numbers or something like that. There's also column security, so they can't see fields like salaries or social security numbers. Processing option, data selection security. If people can change things on the fly when they start an application. Tab security. So inside the application, there's tabs, hyper exits. You can call external applications. You can restrict all of that. Data browser has security as well. You don't want people to, you may not want everybody to access data browser, because data browser is probably the #1 tool that users have to bring the database and or the web servers to a complete screeching halt. So I always strongly recommend that you prevent people from using data browser unless it's absolutely necessary. And when it is necessary, try to restrict them from using indexed fields instead of being able to do wide open queries. You also have charts, whether or not people can see charts. Media objects, though media object security is kind of a little bit newer. And now that they're moved into the database, once you have your media objects in the database, you're moved away from the file system security, which is great because the database is always going to have better security than you can find on a file system. Just as incidentally, when media objects get moved to the database, the objects themselves get stored in a blob field in a new table. Before they were stored on the file system as the regular file, unless it was a text attachment. And then individual parts of each form, you can secure as well, the text blocks, links. You can also do BSSV security. And the buttons, you can restrict people from certain types of application queries. Which is related to what I said before. If you have to enter specific search criteria in the filter fields or the QBE fields, and that really helps in preventing you from bringing back too much data to the database. It's not really preventing people from bringing back too much data, is less of a security thing and more of a system stability thing. So I always recommend setting that up. User-defined objects has security as well, and then some miscellaneous security. User-defined object security is a topic probably deserving of its own entire webcast. And this includes Cafe1, E1 pages, grid formats, one-view reports, advanced queries, watch lists, and so forth. Making sure that those UDOs are secure is, in 9.2, it's incorporated some previously separate ways to secure things. One in particular is grid formats. I don't know if you know, but in 9.2, the way the grid formats are stored has changed. You used to be able to assign grids to roles in 9.2, and now you have to use security to restrict it to roles instead of assigning it. If you have a role in 9.1 that, let's say it was for the accounting department, and you just assigned that role to assign that grid to the accounting role, when you upgrade to 9.2, that grid will be changed to a public role, and it will be available for everybody. And then the intent is for you to then go into UDO security inside the security workbench and restrict that to the particular roles. So if you upgrade to 9.2 and you go to your grid and you drop down your available grid formats, and there's like 50 in there, that probably means that you have a whole lot of formerly role-based grids that got changed to public. So just FYI on that. Something else with JD, you can actually look at security history. Now, security history is always kind of running in the background, but you can enable it to record even more information. And this is turned on inside your JD EI9, and it captures the sign in and sign out of all your users. and it maintains a complete log for user log on and log off events. It also captures user role changes, record changes, password changes, auditing, etc. if you have an auditing setup. And you can use this information here for auditing for most of your SOX requests and business requirements. Now, there's no report that fetches this information, but you can create a custom report. There's actually a document on the Oracle website, on the Oracle support, that allows you to, or that tells you how to kind of make a report that shows that. Now let's move on to Object Management Workbench security. These securities, when you're in OMW, is really kind of weird how they have that security set up. You kind of have to use the P00950 to set that up. There's row security on the OMW table. Like if you don't want people to add themselves as a user to a project, you have to set up row security on the F98221. They might be able to search it and select it, but they can't add themselves to a project. And you can also do application security on this application itself, the W98220J, and just prevent them from running that program altogether. So, and the reason that this is important is because every user is going to have a default project. If they make a change to an application, if they change processing options or change a menu, they will get a default project created, and then they'll suddenly have a reason to go into OMW. So restricting OMW is pretty key. You don't want people to get in there and start modifying your applications without your knowledge, because while the Object Management Workbench is a great change management tool, it doesn't record exactly what has changed, only what was done last on it. In using OMW logging, you can get a lot of information, tremendous amounts of information about when something was checked out or checked in, when it was promoted, back and forth, but you can't tell what was changed. There's also OMW on the web, which I have there on the screen. For those of you not on the latest tools releases, you may not have seen this, but there is OMW on the web, which allows you to do a lot of stuff. Specifically with UDOs, if you're using the UDOs with OMW on the web, that requires a whole separate set of security. So make sure you take a look at the security workbench information in the tools administration guide. I have a link to it inside the webcast. Now, I mentioned before there was also application side stuff. I'm not going to go into details about all of that, but here's one. It's called batch approval security. This restricts the approval and posting of batches to certain users. And you can also restrict unauthorized users from viewing batches other than their own. And that's in the general journal review program. So in this application, you're able to, this is business security. This is not something your CNC would set up. Your business analyst or a security specialist would set this up. But being able to restrict people from viewing batches, since it's a completely separate thing, a lot of people don't think about it, and they may set up their P00950 really well, but they won't remember this, or I've always seen a little bit of confusion about this. And that's not the everything you could possibly do with application non-tool security, but I wanted to just let you all know that there are other parts of security, other things you can do to secure your application on the app side. So let's move on to my favorite part, database security. This really became a big deal for me, an even bigger deal. It kind of hit my radar really hard. I went to a client recently and looked at their security, and it was just all kinds of messed up. There was nothing they could do to prevent everyone in the world from accessing all of their data. And they couldn't figure out why they couldn't create read-only users. They couldn't figure out why, no matter what they did, everyone could still read stuff. So that's what inspired me to create this webcast in general. So we talk about database security. We're going to talk about some best practices. We're going to talk about Oracle Public Shutdown, data store security, and then data encryption. Now, I mentioned earlier in the webcast that we had system users inside JDE. So this is pre 9.2 and also post 9.2. But One thing that happened in prior to 9.2 is that all permissions for all objects are granted to a database role called public, which is really meant for the database to use for system stuff and common grants. So why would you assign all of this to public? Why would they do that in the first place? Because that never made sense to me. So really, it's because JD Edwards is based on world software from 30 plus years ago. It was originally on iSeries, or System 390 or whatever that was before that, and it was basically ported from iSeries to Windows. And in iSeries, it worked fine to have everything run that way because it's a different kind of operating system. But it concentrated all the security inside the application. You didn't have to have anything complex outside or special security people or anything. They could all just be JD Edwards security. And they kept that going forward even with Oracle and SQL Server and other databases, because historically JD Edwards has always tried to minimize the database like the database is kind of there to work for JD Edwards, but you don't have to do anything on it. And that's why they provide so many tools inside JD Edwards to manipulate the database, like OMW table generation and index generation and R98403 and whatnot. But the problem is, in order to make it very easy for the application to manage all the security, you couldn't have crazy stuff going on the database. So they just assigned everything to the public role, which nobody really thinks about or can even touch. And they built it into the application so that it would always assign permissions to the public role. So if you're running prior to 9.2, or even if you could be running 9.2 right now and still have this assigned. And so your data, no matter what security you have enabled inside JD Edwards, the data on your database is completely unsecure. So, and I just answered why is that bad, but I'll tell you more why it's bad. But the public role is just made for system grants. It's like all of the views and things you need inside of a database to actually run your system. You as a regular user, you have to have that. Now, another problem is that when you assign something to public, it overrides every other kind of security that you put on there. You can't, if you want to put a read-only user or just limit somebody to specific tables, you cannot do that because it's all on public. You could put the most restrictive security on a user, like immediately blow up this user as soon as they touch the database. It won't work because it's already all granted to everybody, which it goes without saying it's completely against database or security best practice of all kinds. And this has been like this since what was it, 1998 or whenever the first version came out, 96. Anyways, I started at JD Edwards in 1998, and this is how it worked then. And only in 9.2 has that changed. So in 9.2, permissions are not assigned to public anymore automatically. And now it's managed through a thing called data source security. Now the security is still managed primarily inside JD Edwards, but it's facilitated by having other system users. They've really expanded the role of system users inside JDE and starting to use database roles. So when a 9.2 upgrade or installation occurs, it creates two new roles in the database, one called JDE admin and the other one called JDE user. And on the back end, all of those permissions that were formerly assigned to public are now assigned to these two new roles. And that way you can manage your security in any way that you want. But then in the JD Edwards side, you have to have your application, your data source security set up to point to those roles so that it knows what permissions to give to the internal users. Unfortunately, a 9.2, I hope you guys can see that. It's kind of small on my screen. Unfortunately, 9.2 upgrades don't change your security from the prior release. So if you're upgrading from 9.1 to 9.2, all of your database security previously is assigned to public. When you copy up that data or do a backup or restore and export import, it preserves that public security and puts it into your 9.2 database. So even if you have upgraded to 9.2, you still have your database wide open, except for any new tables that were delivered with 9.2. Now, data source security is not really well known or well understood. I've seen a lot of clients who don't have it set up at all. And combine that with very, very little database information in JDE manuals. And in fact, the information about data source security inside at Oracle site, let me show this to you, is very, very sparse on what exactly is covered. It's basically a couple pages worth of stuff that tells you how to set up the application. But as far as what about the database part, there's really not anything on here about that. A little bit disappointing. So, and that really kind of goes to the point of the database security. Databases just continue to be minimized as a component of the system, and it's unfortunate because the database is such a hugely important part of the installation. In fact, the most important part. Without data, you have no company. In fact, in 2017, companies who did not have any kind of a disaster recovery plan and then had a disaster, 90% of them just flat went out of business. So the data is much more important than really anything else in the system. So, and also another problem is DBAs are not being brought in before the installation and letting them install the database. So they are not aware of the security needs on the database, so it just doesn't get done. You know, the platform pack can only do so much. You actually have to have a DBA install the database, and not just for security, but also to set your collation and things like that that are critical, that have to be done during the installation process and can't be changed afterwards. So inevitably you have issues with security. So I mentioned that 9.2 upgrade preserves the original security except for new tables that it creates. So you end up with this mishmash of 3,000 something tables, or almost 4,000 tables that have all of their permissions granted to public, and then the 80 or 90 new tables created with 9.2 have no security at all because they didn't set up data source security and they didn't set up the users on the database. So the installers or whoever's doing it is now confused. Why can I access most everything except for these tables? And so what do they always do? They grant DBA rights to all of the JDE users and the SCHEMA users. So let me show you this right here. This is the JDE user from a client, and one thing to tell you right now is that the JDE user, the prod DTA user, no user needs DBA rights to function, to work with JD Edwards. They do not require any of these permissions that you see here. Zero. You don't. If somebody has assigned DBA rights to any of your JDE users, then they have done something wrong. You never want to assign DBA rights to anybody except a DBA. And it's very important, not just because DBAs are territorial and quick to anger and generally not very hygienic, except for me. I smell really nice. It's because if you get an audit and they come in and see that all of your users have DBA access, well, it's great to get everybody access to the data, but a DBA can also drop tables. They can hide their tracks. They can delete information or change information and then erase the fact that they ever did it. And if anybody ever discovered that they had full DBA rights and they wanted to do something bad to your company, well, there would be nothing you could do about it. Even if you had auditing enabled, they could go in and remove traces of the auditing. So this is a JDE user. If you see up at the top left, this JDE user has the DBA role. This is the built-in DBA role for an Oracle database. They have one of the, this is a 9.2 system, by the way. They have one of the new 9.2 roles, JDE admin, and then they have the old JDE_ role, which was shipped in prior releases. But then right below that is the system privileges. Now these are privileges granted directly to the user that are related to doing things on the database as a database administrator. So they already have the DBA role granted, but then they also granted unlimited table space, alter any table, blah, blah, blah. So they've given them the rights again, which they already have it with DBA, to do anything at all to any table, drop them, get rid of them, whatever they want. Now on the right side, these are object grants. So this is specific permissions for individual objects granted directly to the user. So if you look at the object name column, you have the tables like F12002. They specifically granted insert, alter, delete, debug, read, references, index, query, replay, all that stuff on all of these tables in addition to all of the other rights that they gave them. So if you're going to go in and review your database security and you look and, oh, well, I'm just going to take this DBA role off and then he'll be fine. Well, you got to look at your system privileges. So you look at those and you remove all those and you think you got it. Then you go to the object grants and then they've got them all granted there. So this user has triple ultimate super duper double down security on it that you're not going to be able to fix just by removing a role. And it also happens on the SCHEMA users. Now, when I talk about a SCHEMA user, I'm talking about your prod DTA, prod CTL, DV DTA, DV900, DV920, those kind of users, OL 920. Those are the individual environment users, I guess you would say. But look here, this is from the same system. The prod DTA has the role called JDE role. It doesn't have any of the new 9.2 roles. It's got these create database link, which I know why they would do that, but they don't need that. And then they also have JDE role. And if you look at JDE role, that also has extra security it doesn't need. You don't need, the role doesn't need create table. It doesn't need create any dictionary, any of that stuff. It does need specific users. It does need the ability to do the OMW actions. So there's no question about that. And the great thing about 9.2 is you can create a new user in the system, a new role that is specifically for creating tables and generating indexes and stuff like that. You don't want to give that to everybody in the system. Now look on the right side, this is prod CTL. So you'd think that prod DTA and prod CTL would have the same permissions, but they don't. Prod CTL has the JDE user role, but not JDE admin or JDE role. And then it has specific object grants to it for a number of tables. And then it has specific system privileges assigned to it as well. Create trigger. Why does prod CTL need create trigger? I can think of some legitimate reasons for that, but I would want the business to tell me that. Now, let's talk about Oracle Public Shutdown. So I talked everything that we had on there, which was public, assigned to public. You're probably wondering, how do we fix that? Well, Oracle created a procedure back in 2007, actually it's a white paper, to describe how to do that. It's basically, in a nutshell, I guess, that you're removing all of the permissions from public and putting it onto another role, like JDE role, or JDE admin, or whichever role you want to put it on. But you can see here, this is a select from a client that has upgraded to 9.2, and you can see in about halfway down, you see the PD920 has 3,875 tables with permissions granted to public, and SY920 at the very bottom has 75 tables granted to public. But you can also see that they have tables granted to JDE admin and JDE user. But none of those grants matter at all because they already have stuff granted to public. So if they're trying to change anything, it's not going to work. Now on the right side of the screen is the total count of how many tables are in prod DTA, 4,842. I didn't list prod DTA on the screen, but in this particular instance, they had about 3,400 tables granted to public, and the rest were, and I guess probably about 90 granted to with no permissions. So that left, maybe hundreds of tables that had some weird hybrid security on it that made no sense at all, which is why this installer probably is the reason why they granted DBA to JDE, because then that fixes everything right away. So, okay, so if you're upgrading from 9.1 to 9.2 or anything to 9.2, you have to run Oracle Public Shutdown or your security will not work correctly in 9.2. And even if you set up data source security, it still will be broken. So on data source security, I showed you that manual. There is a manual that shows how to manage data source security. It's not very good. It's not very helpful. But basically, you can see here JDE admin and JDE user. This is how the platform pack will create these users. So JDE admin is intended to be the one that creates tables and indexes and stuff. And then the JDE user is just a normal user, the select, insert, update, delete. You can add other roles, like if you want to have our JDE read only, you can create that here as well. And one thing to keep in mind is that the information in data source security is just a reference of what's on the database. So if you create a new role in data source security, you have to also create that on the database with the appropriate permissions. Data source security and JD Edwards will not do that, and there's actually no connection whatsoever between what you set up in the JDE database, in the JDE software, and what actually exists on the database itself. It's kind of like indexes. So let's take a look at a client. This client, I'm going to let you guess, did they set up data source security? The answer is no. Here's the data source security screen. Trust me, I clicked find, and the grid was blank. So in this screen, you see that they enable the database security for a particular data source, and then there's a data source type as well in the description, and the user role. So you can do star all here as well. For example, if I wanted to create one user for all of business data-production, then you would put star all in the user role. If you needed to have a specific, like let's say you have a third party, what do you call, DSI or something like that, that goes through JD Edwards, you can create a new security role that just grants access to the tables DSI needs. And the reason you would do that is because you don't want to have somebody figure out the DSI password and then suddenly have complete access to all of your data because you didn't think about, it may be just a service account, but humans do figure those passwords out. So to wrap up here, I've only got a few minutes left. I want to talk about a couple other topics related to the database, and something that people don't think about at all really is encryption. And there's three different types of encryption, which is data at rest, data in motion, and data in use. So data in use is obviously when you're using the data. When you're actually sitting there on your screen manipulating the data, that's called data in use. And that data can be captured through keyloggers or other Tempest type equipment. Somebody could just copy it to Excel if they wanted to. Many different ways to grab data in use. It's the most vulnerable. Data in motion is actually, some people say it's most vulnerable when it's in motion, because when you're sending data, like you're sending an email, it takes a while and it goes a whole bunch of different places before it gets to where it goes, and it's not going to be secure that whole time. So if you're going to send some data from one point to another via a USB drive or a backup, or send it over the wire for disaster recovery, that's data in motion and needs to be encrypted. And then data at rest. This is the data just sitting in your raw files of the hard drive. And you would think, well, it's, that's a database file. It's impenetrable. We can't get in there. Plus, it's being protected by the operating system. And what are they going to do if they just take one data file out of 20? How are they going to put that together? Well, the short story is they can. If you don't have your data at rest encrypted, then someone could steal a data file and then use other tools to determine what the data is inside that data file. They may not get all your data, but they could get the stuff that they need. So don't think that just having your database passwords is enough. You have to make sure that the data just sitting around is encrypted. For example, if you do an export of your database data, that's actually data at rest. And if somebody grabbed that export and moved it to another database, if it was not encrypted, they would just be able to restore it and use it right away. If it is encrypted, they would need the keys to do it, and that makes that file useless to them. So you have to protect it in all the different phases that it goes through. And finally, service accounts, just real quick. If you're going to have a third-party account like DSI or a backup user or something for Crystal Reports, make sure you use a regular user, a user specific for that. Don't use Joe Schmo who might get fired one day or disabled. Use a service account that's clearly something related to that software, because it makes it a lot easier to implement security and also troubleshoot any problems with it. All right, I see we're right up against the time. I'm going to change presenter back to Amanda. And it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. And now I would like to cover a few follow-up items and then move to our question and answer section of our webcast. Just a reminder that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so using the questions panel in the GoToWebinar console on the right of your screen. If you minimized your console earlier, you can click the left arrow key to redisplay the questions panel and you can enter your question. Our webcast today is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on J.D. Edwards. Our upcoming webcasts are listed on the screen, and to view our most up-to-date schedule, please visit getgsi.com/webcasts. GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the J.D. Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, our online resource center where you can access hundreds of recorded on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc., and our on-site and virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or create an account to access our resource center, you can go to getgsi.com, go to Platforms on the main menu, select J.D. Edwards, and select the appropriate link on the left. All right, it looks like we did not receive any questions today, but if you do have any questions that you think of afterwards, you can email either Bill or I, and we will get back to you. So, as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a 1-minute survey when you exit. You'll be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. And after today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone who attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. Thanks again for attending our presentation, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye, everybody.